Thanks, Roger, and thanks for the invitation to speak. I don't have anything AI in my glasses or anything like that, so we'll just have to go analog. But I think my talk is going to nicely wrap together everything in these last two talks, and I'll talk about how AI in large multi-center studies has been utilized and also some of the lessons we've learned. Here are my disclosures. The only thing that's relevant, I will talk about how Carlsmed cages can help your practice. So, anybody know this mountain here, this picture? It's Mount Whitney, the tallest peak in contiguous United States, lower 48 here. And, it's pretty tall, but it's not that tall. It's surmountable. Even I did it. And the reality is I think this is kind of like MIS surgery right now. We're getting there. We're getting near the top. We're having the latest technology, smaller incisions, more efficacious, right? We can do, prone lateral surgeries now. We have these small screws that we can do percutaneous long segment fusions in, and we can now make our surgery safer. We do lateral cages so we don't have to do facetectomies and expose the nerves. So we're doing better and better, and we're clapping ourselves on the back. But right around the corner is this new crest, this new peak, and it's artificial intelligence in MIS. We've talked about some of the key points already, some of the things at stake, and this is the next thing we're going to have to figure out how we get over. So, why is MIS well suited for AI? Well, MIS generates a huge amount of data. This is just a picture from my PTP. What we have here is some X-ray data, right? We have a retractor-based camera, so we have all the video from the case. We have navigation going the whole time. I have neuromonitoring. These are just some of the things aside from the electronic medical record of what we look at. And if we multiply this by all the centers doing something similar like this each day, we have a tremendous amount of data, right? So of course, AI is very well suited to sift through this data, try to learn a little bit more, gain some insights there. But alas, that's the multi-center double-edged sword. So we think that more data is better. But not necessarily, right? Now we're introducing a whole bunch of heterogeneity. We're introducing a whole bunch of different surgical techniques. Now we have different variations in follow-up protocols, different imaging. So it can be particularly problematic for some of the things Dr. El-Sayed had said. But among this variation, AI can still be helpful, and there's some multi-center work that's shown how it can be helpful in each of these domains, right, in the whole cycle of patient care that we have. So the first thing is, of course, it can be helpful in patient workup. When we're doing things like radiographic analysis, it can be particularly helpful. I thought this multi-center study was quite interesting. This study looked at 3 different deep learning models to try to assess which MRI factors show that there's a calcification in the disc, right? Because I don't know about you, when I'm just doing a simple discectomy, I don't get a CT scan most of the time. Sometimes I accidentally have one. But you'd like to know this, right? Especially in MIS. If you're trying out endoscopic for the first time, maybe you don't want to do a very calcified disc. It's not going to be the easiest thing for you to do. And so, it'd be helpful to have this information. So they looked at 1,224 patients who underwent MRI and CT, so they had a ground truth. And they found that one of their deep learning models, the ResNet 34 algorithm, was the best. They actually had about 90% classification accuracy with this. So, of course, again, you can see how AI can particularly inform your practice, help you, your initial decision-making for even what kind of surgeries you want to do for the patients. This is just, of course, just one of the many radiographic applications. I mean, there's so many papers in each of these domains. I could have a whole hour talk on this. Next thing is, of course, AI can help with pre-surgical counseling, right? One of the things we know is there's so many randomized clinical trials now that show this is better or that's better. So this is our very popularized SLIP trial, right? Spondylolisthesis. We're MIS surgeons. We treat this all the time. And this says, hey, we should fuse everybody. Everybody does better with that. But we know that not everybody with a fusion does great, and sometimes you have to revise them, right? Like with this ALIF and this other surgeon's case that I had to do. But the reality is we'd like to have that patient in front of us, all with the same radiographic diagnosis, and be able to differentiate them a little bit. Now I'm trying to click forward, and it's not letting me, as much as I like showing you that clip of the video. Let's see. Any help you can do on the next slide back there? There we go. So one of the things that our study group, the QOD, set out to do is, can we differentiate these patients based on different phenotypes? And in this study, we used a k-means clustering analysis to be able to differentiate different phenotypes of patients that have grade 1 spondylolisthesis, right? All the same radiographic diagnosis. And of course, we found that people actually clustered around 2 types of diseases, one with high disease burden and one with medium disease burden, and they actually had 2 different 2-year outcomes. So this is now published in the Red Journal, and there's a calculator that comes out with it too. So it starts to begin, that we can differentiate these patients a little bit better than we can just sitting in the clinic looking at a patient with an X-ray. The next thing is that AI can really help with surgical planning. Some of the things, right, this is a classic case that we see in clinic, a moderate scoliosis, a moderate deformity as well, both in the coronal and sagittal plane. And one of the things that we need to do is, it'd be nice if we could plan the surgery before. And this is exactly what we can do now. You can actually use AI segmentation to change your spine to the alignment that you want. And once you have that new alignment, you can actually 3D print a cage or these rods to that alignment, right? Or with the rods, you can, predict what kind of thoracic compensation you're going to have, and then print this rod so you can hit your correction, right? These are all things to help to do the surgery ahead of time to make your surgery better, and so that you can hit your alignment quite good for these sorts of surgeries. This was one of my MIS deformity cases. The next thing is, I've touched on it, intraoperative execution. That's one of the important things that we can use AI for. We heard about, in a way, Dr. Massan's work, getting to the operating room and getting that flow better. Same sort of idea here. This is a group that interestingly looked at a way to improve doing L5-S1 transforaminal endoscopic decompressions and discectomies. One of the things is we know that's a particular anatomy. We know that there could be a bone in the way, the foramen may be small, the nerve could potentially be in the way. So it'd be nice to be able to have this information even live or ahead of surgery. One, can you do that approach? But then two, if you do that approach, what's the best area to make that incision from midline? What kind of angle do you want to take? And so that's exactly what they did here. One, they looked at 50 magnetic resonance data samples, and then they actually had people, as the ground truth, manually segment this. And that was the interesting thing here. It took about 9 hours for them to manually segment this, as opposed to when they used the AI, ultimately they could get that down to 2.5 seconds. So just think of that sheer difference, right? And they found interesting findings, right? Like for their data set, they found that most of their incisions were about 9 centimeters from midline, different than what they were anticipating, about 12 to 16 centimeters from midline. So you're gleaning things that you might not know that could help with your surgeries. So I think that was a particularly useful case use there. And this is just, of course, one of the many clinical applications too. And the last one that Dr. El Sayed already touched on is there's a lot that's been done in outcome prediction. We can just see by the sheer magnitude of the number of publications that increased since 2012. A lot of people are looking into this, and it can be applied to all phases of care. One thing I thought that was particularly interesting for an MIS crowd is one of the things we always want to know in cancer treatment is, what's the chance if I'm going to get a surgical site infection in this patient, right? Because it totally ruins their post-op course, right? They can't get their radiation. We have to wait. We have to do all these other things. And the radiation and the chemo is what we need to get them to do. So if we can have this AI model be able to help better predict when they get a surgical site infection, maybe you might use some of your MIS techniques, percutaneous screws, or my group's published video here for MIS tubular corpectomy even, right? Just ways to increase the safety of the surgery. And you can see based on this AI model at this multi-center study, they were able to predict surgical site infection with an AUC north of 90, right? Versus they actually looked at 5 different doctors in this study as well, and they were basically north of just chance. Right, so we know that we, on our own, are not very good at these prediction things. But those are some of the things that we've used AI for. But I thought the big thing was, now that we're setting out, I'm in a couple study groups. We're trying to use, AI in this. There's some lessons that are learned, right? And we've talked about this. Dr. Iyer earlier talked about it. Garbage in, garbage out. We know that, hey, you can't just unleash this data to these models and say, oh, it's going to learn something. No, you have to parameterize it. You need to know what the definitions are. You need to standardize it early. Otherwise, any finding you have, just complete garbage. The next thing is that we've started to learn that surgeons don't trust black boxes. For example, one of the things with some of these personalized rod platforms is if it just spits out this rod and says, this is what you need, well, surgeons say, well, I don't know. How did you know that the thoracic compensation is going to be like that? Did you see some ankylosis? And it's really this black box. So what we need is these ways that there's either an explainable AI, or you show feature importance, or you show different things that explain that to the surgeon so that you'll have better uptake of these things, better adoption. The next thing is that center-specific calibration matters. We've talked about this a little bit too. One of the concepts is that, of course, we think the more data, the better, but actually data trained on each individual center amongst a multi-center study is going to be better than the model trained on the whole amount of the data. But there's this new concept of federated learning in which they can kind of take the best of both worlds, learn a little bit from each center, also from all the data as well. So that's something that will be important when we're embarking on these multi-center studies. Touch on this again, early data harmonization is the biggest point here, right? We've talked about how difficult things are for, natural language processing and large language models, but, what you need is actually to get the data out, data label, get, data manager to look at the data, audit it, use a red cap so that people have to select certain data, labels, or call the data a certain thing, and that's the only way we'll be able to use these models, employ them in a sensible manner. The next thing is that we need to understand that bias is baked into these practice patterns, right? The classic thing is, if I operate on an elderly patient, it seems that they're not getting as much better. But what you're really selecting for when you're saying that is, I only operate on healthy patients, so that delta of improvement is going to be lower anyway. So we need to make sure that these things don't happen in these models. We need to anticipate them. You can have things like a diversity of inclusion criteria. You need to make sure that we're following our non-ops, which is a big field we don't do very well, so that we don't know the treatment effect. Also, we need to externally validate. Just doing cross-internal validation is not enough. And Dr. El-Sayed said that very well. And there's a whole bunch of regulatory, legal, and ethical barriers, right? One of the issues is there's going to be IRB coordination, and I'll tell you, each center has a different IRB that they need. Some need AI-specific consent. This takes months to years to get this done, just to even start the study, so you have to start early. Next thing is data sharing. Nightmare, right? We used to just share Excel sheets over the emails. Now we need, to put this data on the clouds. We need business associate agreements. Some centers, don't ever want anything identifiable leaving their firewall, so that's a problem. Last thing is ownership, right? So what's it going to do? Who's going to own this model? It's trained by 14 sites, let's say, in one of our study groups. And then let's say it's trained on 80 surgeons worth of data. Do they get authorship on this? Let's say there's industry partners. Do they just license that model afterwards? Or is this something that they will own or they can deploy as they want? And then also there's liability questions we've not touched on yet. One of the things, right, for the endoscopic case use that I just showed, for example, right now, yes, if a surgeon uses that and they have a problem, well, then the surgeon's going to get sued. But let's say one day they market themselves as the AI endoscopic trajectory company, and then there's something that happens. Who's liable at that point? These are the key questions that we're going to have to answer. Right now we have this new generation that's born. This is my baby just born, Audrey, and this is generation beta now, and they're totally immersed in AI. And that's what we are now, so we need to be able to be cognizant of these things, these lessons that are learned so far. And just looking at the forward towards the future, this is one of the interesting studies coming out of the WashU group, in which they actually used AI to generate synthetic data. So what they did was, they realized, well, in these multi-center studies, part of the issue is it's so hard to accrue all these patients, consent these patients, get them in. But if we could create synthetic data that behaves like the data that we want to collect, then maybe we can study different things. They actually showed that their 30-day reoperation, 30-day readmission rates were pretty similar to a standard population. So this is something that potentially AI could be used for in the future as well. Hopefully answered a few questions that you had out there. Thanks.